everyone. Good morning. We're up in the cab of the truck today because we're going to talk about what is it like driving an ambulance. I've had a handful of commenters ask me that exact question, either because they're thinking about jumping into one or they've already made a purchase and they're upfitting it. So I've had about 6 months of travel time in the ambulance. And I'm going to talk about some of the things, pluses and minuses, that I've experienced driving an ambulance. So one of the first things, and I've got a list here, so bear with me. One of the first things that's a huge advantage on an ambulance is the storage. You can't beat the cabinets, both inside and out, that ambulances come with. Now mine was in really good condition inside, so the cabinets were all able to be reused. The sliding doors that have the felt strips in them to keep them from rattling, so when those doors shut, they stay shut. So storage is a huge benefit. Another plus, for me at least in this vehicle, is highway driving is really quite good. Once this truck is up to speed, and I set the cruise control, I don't have to really worry about anything. It goes straight down the road, smoothly. It can take interstate inclines, hills, as long as I have the speed set to 62 miles an hour or above. So I typically drive between 62 and 65, and I set the cruise control. And it will go up the inclines without having to come out of overdrive, and it will also go down the very steep hills. Now there have been a couple of instances with some really steep, long downhills where I've had to hit the brakes. The speed would start to climb up above the cruise control speed. Now the truck is able to keep the speed at the cruise control going down hills, and it does that by, I can hear it engages and disengages the transmission, so it's using engine braking to keep the speed down. But at some point, if it's a very long steep hill, it will go up above, and that's when I have to hit the brakes. That's only happened a small number of times. So highway driving in this truck is really quite great, really great. Another plus for the ambulances is the build quality is very high. Now they have to meet all kinds of safety regulations and requirements, rollover tests. So they build these things just with a very high level of quality and structural rigidity. I've said it to multiple people, it's overbuilt. An example is I was removing a wooden panel. It's right here behind the bulkhead. It's a cover-up panel. I had to get behind it to see what was there, and there were 32 screws that had to be removed. So you've got the aluminum edge pieces, the beauty trim, so they had a series of screws, and then there were the larger screws that actually held the board into what was behind it. 32 screws to remove a board it's about 18 by 40 inches. So it's not a huge piece of wood, 32 screws. So build quality is very high when you're talking about the box in my truck, and I'm sure in all the others, because of the safety requirements that they have to meet. And they want these things to last. You know, these are fleet vehicles. You know, they're used for life-saving situations, so everything has to be perfect and everything needs to work every time. So very high build quality. Another plus is it's a Ford. Now, the same thing can be said if you have a GM-based, a Chevy or a GM. I know there are also some Chrysler-based, but I think the majority of them that I see are Ford and a little bit less GM, Chevy. So what that means is I can take this to a lot of different service locations because it is, from the bulkhead forward, it's a Ford van. The drivetrain, the suspension, all of that can be worked on by any Ford dealership or any Ford service center. And when I was in New York, as I was getting the van ready to hit the road, I had a really good friend of mine, I miss him, named Tim, and he's a Lincoln master technician at the local Lincoln dealership, and of course they also have a Ford dealership. And so I was taking this in to them to have the van looked at. I had some shocks put on, I had some service work done before I left New York, and just took it to the regular Ford dealership to have that done. And so that would go, I'm sure, the same for Chevy, GM based ambulances. So they're not some exotic, hard to work on vehicle, is what I'm saying. Now, another plus, and this is kind of not really having to do with the mechanicals or the function of the vehicle, is that its uniqueness. Expect a lot of people to come up and talk to you when you're driving an ambulance that's upfitted as a camper. I have had more people come and ask, was that an ambulance? Yes, and that starts the conversation. So you will get a lot of socialization when you're driving an ambulance, just because it is something different. And I see them out here. There's Devin and April that have a black Ford ambulance. There's another gentleman, I haven't met him, it's a red ambulance that I see around. And I've seen a couple others, there's a white with blue stripes. And I'm talking just in a small little geographic and demographic group here. I see ambulances, and this is only one small, little crumb of the country that I'm in. So I know there's a lot more of them out there. So the uniqueness is a conversation starter anytime you pull up in your ambulance. Now, the handling and drivability of this truck. Now let's talk about a couple of negatives. And this would go for any larger size vehicle. For me, it was a little bit of a shock when I first started driving the truck. I got in it and was immediately taken back by how big it felt to drive. I was coming from regular passenger vehicles. My daily driving vehicle was a Lincoln MKX, which is like a crossover SUV. So I got in this and felt like I was driving a really big vehicle. Now today, fast forward 6 months later, or actually it's almost been a year since I bought the truck. Now I get in it and drive it and I don't have a second thought. It doesn't feel as big to me any longer. I'm used to handling it, but just be ready for an initial learning curve that you have to get the mindset that you're driving something big. It's, even though the front end is a van, it's very heavy and it takes some getting used to. Now, a second thing that I have on my negatives list kind of ties into that first one, is that the starting acceleration from a red light, from a stop sign, is not great. These are very heavy. It's taken me some time to get comfortable with really putting my foot in it. And what I mean is giving it a lot of gas, or giving it a lot of gas pedal. It will get up and go, but from a normal off the line start, you got a big heavy vehicle. This engine and drivetrain combination, this power stroke engine, a lot of power, a lot of torque, not made for off the line acceleration. Now, I can keep up with traffic, but you got to get comfortable with kind of putting your foot in it if you really want to get up and go. And I don't always want to do that. It uses a lot of fuel. I don't want to wear on the drivetrain, so I typically take off pretty slowly, but that takes some getting used to when you're driving around in town, in the city, and you've got a vehicle that doesn't have great off-the-line acceleration. So you got to be aware of that, and you got to get used to it. I'm used to it now. You have to plan your turns. You have to plan your left turns when you're waiting in a line of traffic, when there's oncoming traffic. If you don't think you can make it before that next vehicle comes, don't do it. Just wait. So you got to get used to that. And early on, I was still trying to, take that left turn, oncoming traffic, and people were beeping their horns at me. And it took me, I had to be trained on how to drive the vehicle that doesn't have as great acceleration. So I have it on the list of negatives, but again, this first two things on my negative list are me getting used to the vehicle. Okay. So a third that I have on the negative list, and again, it was more of me getting used to it, is that this is a diesel. I've never driven a diesel. I've never owned a diesel. And for me, still to this day, I cannot get used to this engine sound. It sounds to me like it's going to explode. Diesel engines make a rattling sound. I'm used to quiet gasoline engines. And still to this day, I listen to this engine intently. There's many times I drive, no radio on, just listening to the engine, trying to understand the sounds that it makes. And I've gotten a lot better at it. I can hear the load. I can hear when it's spooled up. I can hear the turbo spin. So again, it's about getting used to the sound. And is being a diesel really a negative? No, because in the long run, the diesel has a lot of power, and it's just getting used to driving a diesel that was tough for me and still is. Another negative, and this is not specific to ambulances, but it has dually rear end, the tires on the back, and being able to check the air pressure and put air in those dually tires is a challenge. The way that the valve stems are, you have to get a specific double-headed air chuck and air pressure gauge. And if you go to a location to put air in and they don't have that double-headed chuck, you're not going to be able to get air in. Now here's my pressure gauge, and you can see it's double-headed. So this allows you to reach both of the types of dually valve stems that you typically find on a double rear wheel vehicle. Not specific to ambulances, but ambulances, most all of them have dually rear ends. So you've got to be prepared to be able to check your air pressure and put air in and get comfortable with it. Now another that I have on the negative list is all of the wiring that's in these ambulances. These things are wired with a lot of accessories and a lot of features, and you have to learn that wiring. I contacted the manufacturer of my ambulance. It's a Marquis ambulance. And when I called them and talked to their service department, I found that Marquis, the company, had been bought and sold a couple of times over the last decade or so, and they didn't have any records dating back to 2002 when this truck was manufactured. So I was unable to get any detailed schematics. I have read stories online of people with ambulances contacting the manufacturer and getting emailed a whole set of schematics and making their job a lot easier. So I wasn't able to do that. So you have to be very comfortable with wiring, and you got to just dig in. the way that I learned the wiring in this truck, and I have a really good understanding of it now, is I dug in. I had to install my batteries, my inverter system. I had to disconnect. Up here there was an entire console between the seats that had a whole slew of control switches for all kinds of things. It had a couple of radios in it, and I didn't want this console here. I wanted it open in between the seats so that Lefty could make his way in and out. So I had to disconnect all of these switches and panels and terminate all those wires. So I have a wire loom that I pulled back down under the floor of the truck. It's a wire loom, probably has 50 wires in it anyways, that all have been terminated. I used crimp-on termination terminals to put on the end, and then zip tied it all up, and it's all wrapped and taped, and all of those wires that came up here are disconnected, except for a small piece of one of the control panels that I repositioned out back there for my outside scene lights. But you have to become comfortable with the wiring, and if you're not an electrical person, you're going to have a difficult time upfitting your ambulance, because you've got a lot of wiring to deal with. You've got to figure out, what do you want to keep, what do you not want to keep. You've got a whole closet full of bus bars and fuses and relays, and still today I still have some wiring. I should say I still have some of the relays and fusing in my control box that I want to disconnect and power down. So as an example, there used to be a vacuum pump system, oxygen system. So all of these different things had wiring that went to them, which has now all just been terminated, but may still have power going to it. So I need to jump in my electrical panel and pull out any fuses and relays of systems that aren't being used anymore. So that's on my to-do list. And that's even with me really understanding all the electrics in here. Now, I will say one thing. The Marquee ambulance, the wiring, all had printed identification on it. So you got a wire loom with 20 different colored wires in it, but each wire had printed on it what it was. So it might say left scene light, rear right flasher, inverter. All of them were printed, and this was printed the whole length of the wire. Huge benefit. In some cases, made my job so easy because Marquee took the time to have their wire custom made with identification markings on it. Really great. So overall, driving an ambulance and living in an ambulance, would I recommend it to people? Specific situations, yes. I'm a single person, I'm alone with my dog. It's really well suited for us. We can get locations that I want to get to. It's not too big that we can't go through some rough terrain, which I have definitely done in this thing. And it is big enough that I feel like I'm not cramped up. I keep it pretty tidy in back, allowing myself plenty of room. Like right now, the bed is folded up for the day. The whole floor is clear. The countertops are clear for the most part. So it feels like what I need it to feel like. Now, not everybody is like me. I need things to be kind of tidy and not a lot of clutter around. So an ambulance is big enough that I feel good in it, but not too big that I lose some of the flexibility of being able to reach different locations. Would I recommend it for every single person? Of course not. There's no vehicle that's perfect for every person in every situation. But right now, today, for what I'm doing, this ambulance is really terrific for me and for Lefty. So one of the things that I know I'm going to continue to do is to continue to add new features and new options and systems to my ambulance. Since I left New York and got on the road, I've added a solar system. I've added a max air roof fan. I've added the diesel air heater. Those are pretty major systems, and I've installed them while out on the road. That's going to continue. I know that those types of additions are going to continue. I added a backup camera while I've been on the road. Now let me talk about that for a minute. So back in New York, before I left town, and I think I touched on this story in one of my other videos, I went over to a local trailer hitch installer to see about getting a trailer hitch put on the truck. I pulled into their parking lot, kind of in the outer fringe of their parking lot, pulled off to the side of it, kind of under a tree. Wasn't really in a parking spot, but it was a good location for me as far as turning back around. And I parked, and I went in, and I was only in for about 5 minutes. Turns out they kind of didn't want to do it. They referred me to a welder fabricator who I ended up using for the trailer hitch. So I was in and out in about 5 minutes. Went over to my truck, got in, and I was sitting there, and I was calling the fabricator, the number they gave me. And while I was doing that, a semi came in alongside of me to make a delivery, and he needed to get around in front of me to go behind the building. So he made contact with me and told me what he was trying to do, and I said okay, and the truck was already idling. I put it in reverse and just started idling backwards, and boom, I hit something, and I panicked. I was still new to driving the truck. I put it in park, I jumped out and looked, and sitting behind me was a brand new Cadillac black SUV. But it made me realize that I really needed to get a backup camera, because even with sight, I can see out the back windows, but those windows are almost 5.5, 6 feet off the ground. So anything below those windows, it's a blind spot. So I added the backup camera up high above the doors, pointing downward. I can see the motorcycle, and I can see well out into any obstacles that might be back there. So definitely get a backup camera for these. It is a big vehicle. I've got the side mirrors that are the towing mirrors that can expand out. I have them all the way out. I can see down the sides, but can't see anything behind the truck. So you've got to have a backup camera when you're driving a vehicle of this size. So those are the pros and cons. I tried to keep it to 5 of each. I would like to hear comments on this video. If there's any specific questions that any of you have about driving and owning an ambulance, please let me know, and I'd be glad to answer them. But these were the things that came to mind when I sat down to make up a list for this video. So you heard my negatives were mostly about me getting used to the truck. So that's the one thing I would impress on anyone watching this video, is just be open and drive the truck, and be open to the experience of driving a different kind of vehicle. They're big, they're heavy, they like to rock side to side. So when you're going over bumps, try to always go over a bump that's both wheels. If you just go over one wheel, it gets the truck rocking side to side. That's something that was, again, I had to get used to that. So anytime I'm going over some bumps, if there's no way I can avoid a one-wheel bump, I slow way down and crawl over it so that I only get 1 or 2 rocks. If you go over some bumps like that and you get this truck rocking, anything you have that's secured may come unsecured and fall onto the floor. And how do I know that? Because it's happened to me. So anyone has any specific things you want to hear about, let me know. Leave a comment, get in touch with me, and I'd be glad to answer it. I can even make another follow-up video about this topic. All right, thanks friends. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Hit the notification bell icon so you know when I release new videos. And give me a thumbs up if you like them, and a thumbs down if you don't. Bye, friends.